Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
It is Depeche Mode, the podcast. How's it going? I'm your host, Jon Justice. Here to bring you the latest news when it's available, and commentary about the greatest band on the planet. It's arguable, but you devotees know what I am talking about. All right, on this week's episode, of course, we have your emails. You can always drop me that, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be enjoying the show, up on YouTube, leave a comment there as well. There was the BBC documentary that debuted a few days ago. I'll give you some thoughts on that. Also, the track listing for the upcoming Depeche Mode film M, of which there has been no marketing whatsoever. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Getting into the BBC documentary, I have some thoughts that came about because of that, of future promotion for Depeche Mode projects, who was in charge then, the decisions that they were making that are better now. And again, it's different times in terms of record labels and the band's popularity, so I'm not going to be too harsh on it, even though this fan, and I think you as well, would love to see some news coming out of future releases in terms of remixes, reissues, potential box sets, and of course promotion for this film that, while many of you listening have had the chance to see because you went to the Tribeca Film Festival, the rest of the world hasn't yet. And it's supposed to be coming out in the next few months, and there hasn't been any sort of information about the official release date, a trailer, or anything like that. So I will share with you some of the information that I was able to find, and specifically the track listing of somebody who went and actually saw the film. So let's go ahead and start here for this week's episode of Depeche Mode, the podcast. So we'll start off with an email first, and we have more to get into in the official listener feedback portion of the show. But friend of the show, Rome Ed, writes, I've been trying to listen to the new BBC podcast documentary regarding Depeche Mode without any luck. Were you able to listen to it at all? Looking forward to the podcast. Let us know if you were able to listen to it. Always enjoy listening to the show. Thank you, Rome. Unfortunately, I was not. And I think that this might be because we're not living in earshot of the BBC, and so platforms that are overseas, as we would be, don't have access to the BBC material. I tried several times this morning to listen to this mini documentary, and unfortunately came up no good. What I did do, though, is I went through and did a little bit of research. Several listeners to the show, and if you're overseas and you're able to listen to the show, I would love to hear your thoughts. But I did read some reviews from fans who did have the opportunity to listen to it, and unfortunately, I didn't hear very good things about it, and that's kind of a bummer. Apparently, there isn't anything new in terms of recent comments from the band. There was some clips of Martin and Dave in the documentary and the band members, but nothing new. It was rehashed material. I heard from several different individuals that said there was kind of an annoying music bed that was running in the background of the documentary, and there was very little of Depeche Mode's music in the documentary, which I am painfully aware of, probably due to licensing issues, because the band's label is really good about making sure that if you play any Depeche Mode music, they're going to tag you on it. Oddly enough, my releasing of, in the end, the version that I had on a previous podcast hasn't been tagged yet. And I can only imagine it's because the licensing of the song, because it hasn't been officially released, isn't in the queue in terms of the AI going and scouring the internet for individuals that are unauthorized to be playing Depeche Mode music. I also read several comments relating to this BBC mini documentary that it was kind of bland in its presentation, and it was basically just an historical overview of the band and information that you and I already know. And therein lies kind of the problem. Because if you had asked me ahead of that documentary what my expectations were, unfortunately, apart from some of the specifics like the comments about the music bed, I would have guessed that it was probably going to be a rather straightforward, surface level analyzing of the band's history and career without getting into any sort of depth or new information that you and I don't already know. And listen, in the past, in my opinion, whichever label was attached to the band, and this would be, well, I'll lay the timeline out here in a minute, but I think previous labels and when the band was on more of a consistent active cycle of releasing records, where we weren't talking about post-Delta Machine and certainly post-Spirit of, will they make another record? That was always assumed they would make another record. There are very few casual fans of Depeche Mode. And I'm going to add context to that statement. But there are very few casual fans of the band. And those that are not consuming content like these documentaries. Now, I'm talking about in terms of the total fandom of Depeche Mode. I would say that a smaller portion than most people realize are casual fans. That's what's special about this band, is how it endures and connects with its audience, where it's not enough to just have the albums. You know, so many of us are completists. We clamor and crave to get further information about this band. There's a connection that the band has always made with its audience, which drives the fandom that wants to consume as much as we possibly can. There are certainly, obviously, a lot of casual fans. They come out for the shows. They know all the hits. The band is aware of this. But most of the fandom that's consuming the documentaries, like the one playing on the BBC, are more of your hardcore fans. I don't think the casual fans are gravitating towards documentaries like that. So it's tough not to be disappointed when you hear a documentary like that, because it's the hardcore fans that want to hear new information or something they haven't heard before. And so when you get a sort of surface level documentary that runs a half hour, it's kind of like, oh, I heard all this before. It's interesting to see it packaged in a different way, but it's not all that exciting. And I'll give you a really good example. Going back to the, well, let's see. This would be the tail end of the 1990s. And you look at, say, the Behind the Music documentary, back when that show was airing. That documentary was fantastic. I mean, we ended up getting insight into the band and interviews and comments that we'd never seen before. It is a damn shame that that was never released officially, even though you can go and find really grainy clips online. That was, in terms of chronicling the start of the band up until Ultra and all of what the band dealt with, I mean, it is one of the best documentaries that's out there. Now, the earlier release documentaries all did provide that level of insight and new information that you and I always looked for. A lot of varying guests on the documentaries for the remastered releases, different labels from different parts of the globe, from different countries all over the world, talking about their views of a particular album, talking to those that worked on the album, providing levels of insight that we hadn't seen before. You know, that all seemed to stop after playing The Angel, which is such a bummer. You know, Delta Machine, you have Anton Corbijn's documentary, you have his concert footage, Alive in Berlin. Spirit, of course, you have Spirits in the Forest, but that was focused on a handful of fans in the concert. You know, Memento Mori, these have all lacked comprehensive documentaries. And all of those releases, by the way, in my opinion, could absolutely benefit, in an incredibly positive way, a detailed breakdown and documentary examination into the making of those records. I hope that one day we do. I am dying to know. You know, playing The Angel, we got some on the official release. There was a documentary that was attached to it. I mean, one of the last best documentaries is the one that came out, the multiple documentaries that came out in that massive box set for Sounds of the Universe. And I firmly believe that I appreciate those albums that I just mentioned that came before, in no small part to the recording process and the insight that was given into the creative choices made on Exciter and Playing the Angel and Sounds of the Universe. And I would really love to get that same sort of insight into Delta Machine and Spirit and Memento Mori, an album that I already love, but especially Spirit. Because this is an album that I think most of us fans have really struggled with. And I can't help but wonder, and this happens to me when it comes to documentary for movies, where I find details within the creative process that make me respect the film more so than I did before. When you find out why creative choices were made in a particular way, or how, when it comes to films, particular scenes were crafted, or special effects were deployed. In this case, I would love to know decisions that were made that led to the versions that we received of the songs on those albums. Because we'll get into this in listener feedback. A friend of the show had asked a question of which albums next to Memento Mori do I like less? And I'll talk about that coming up. So I would hope that one day we would get those things. I assume they were chronicled, and questions that I would ask the band. Why did those comprehensive documentaries stop so seemingly abruptly? It may just be a byproduct of not having platforms to release those documentaries on the way that we did with the re-releases. And again, I'm just making excuses right now. I don't know what the answer is, but that little snippet that we received as fans in the run-up to the release of Memento Mori and the promotion, those one-off comments talking about the difficulty of making Spirit sounds an awful lot like what the band went through, although different circumstances, with the making of Songs of Faith and Devotion. And Spirit is an album whose production I very much enjoy, but the music in and of itself I've struggled with. And I'll just say it one more time. If I had a comprehensive documentary on the making of that album, perhaps it would help me sort of break through some of the frustrations that I have listening to that album and how the songs just don't connect with me. I'm looking for a connection to those particular songs. So, as always, love to hear your thoughts. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or throw that comment up in the comments section on YouTube. So I'm going to put a bit of a caveat on this. I found this online from an individual who said they had seen the Memento Mori tour, but the Depeche Mode film M, and they put out the complete track listing according to their recollection. They say the order may be a bit off. They were going based off of memory, but I hadn't seen yet a list of the songs that they chose for the performances of the film, so I thought that I would share that with you this week. So here is the list. 18 tracks in all, 2 of which take place during the credits, however. But My Cosmos Is Mine, Wagging Tongue, It's No Good, Everything Counts, Sister of Night, Speak to Me, My Favorite Stranger, Soul with Me, Wrong, A Pain That I'm Used to, World in My Eyes, Stripped, Enjoy the Silence, Condemnation, Never Let Me Down Again, Personal Jesus, and then, of course, you had In the End, the unreleased tracks that plays during the credits, and also Ghosts Again played during the credits. Listen, I kind of dig this playlist, and I like the fact that we get Wagging Tongue, Speak to Me, My Favorite Stranger, Soul with Me. I think it's unfortunate that Ghosts Again ended up in the credits, but also My Cosmos Is Mine. I like the inclusion of the majority of the Memento Mori tracks that they played on tour. It's unfortunate that Before We Drown wasn't included, as it is unfortunate in my view that Ghosts Again wasn't officially in the set list. That being said, for me personally, there's a Ghosts Again live version that was shot from a few rows back of where I saw them with my friend Matthew in Denver. And that's my go-to to go watch Ghosts Again live. So, listen, either way, 16 tracks for the film. It's a nice healthy amount. reminds me quite a bit of the paring down that was done for the devotional release. What I have seen of the documentary so far has me excited. The stylistic choices that Fernando Frias made for the film, I think it's going to work quite nicely, and I certainly heard positive things from the individuals that actually went and saw the film. Hopefully we'll receive more official information about when it's coming out and where we can watch it coming up sooner than later. All right, let's get into your listener feedback this week. Again, leave a comment up on YouTube or email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Chris Culpepper writes this: I'm sure you've heard the Alan Wilder Some Great Reward demos that he created solely with his vocals. Nothing really impressive, he says, but still a cool find. I have not heard those. And at some point coming up this weekend, just because I've been super busy, I'm going to try to go and seek out to find those, because I have not heard those demos before. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know that there were demos created solely with Alan Wilder and his vocals. So that's something that I need to go and track down. Now, Chris goes on to ask, which studio albums do you feel are inferior to Memento Mori? And then he also says, have you ever considered incorporating fans' questions for you with a video accompaniment? So you can see our face, hear our words, or is it too much work? You know, listen, I would love to do that, and I know I've said this a lot of times on the show. The difficulty that I have in doing the show on a weekly basis is my time is just so limited with my full-time job. And so I try to make sure that I can do a show every week, and I would absolutely love to do more with the show, including getting an abundance of guests on the show. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to do so because my time fluctuates so much, and I don't know when I'm going to record the podcast. So I have a list of things that I would love to do with the show in the future, but it's only going to be able to come about if, one, it's more financially viable, but more specifically and more importantly, if I were to go and have the time to do it. I just simply don't. I have an 8th book idea for my EMBARK science fiction series that I would love to write, and I got started on a while back, and even then, I just simply don't have the time to sit down and go and write the book. So, regarding the studio albums that I feel are inferior to Memento Mori, this is really tough. Because I started to sort of look at that question based off of a desert island disc sort of concept of which albums would I take with me, and which ones do I find somewhat inferior. So I'll kind of track that, and I'll answer that question in the way that I've already mentioned in terms of ranking Memento Mori, and that is, I would probably put everything post-Ultra as inferior to Memento Mori, but I have a difficult time even being that specific because there are so many really good, strong tracks on other albums that would keep me from not including them on a desert island. Thankfully, we don't have to go and do that. So let me pare it down a little bit more. I would definitely say that I feel Delta Machine and Spirit are inferior to Memento Mori. I might slide in there Sounds of the Universe, but there are some tracks on that album that I absolutely love. You know, Playing the Angel, and I know a lot of people are down on Exciter, but Exciter is such a unique and interesting album, and such, as we talked about last week on the show, a turning point for the band after everything they'd gone through. It marks the new era with the singles tour behind them. Alan's left the band. They did an album after Alan. Dave got off of his drug addiction, and that Exciter album really sets the stage for that next era of the band. So I guess I would probably have to go Delta Machine and Spirit. Even though there are aspects of both those albums I really enjoy, I just feel like Memento Mori overall as a complete package is just a much better, from top to bottom, beginning to end, representation of the band than those other two albums are. There's a cohesiveness and a consistency with Delta Machine and Spirit there's just this disjointedness in my view in terms of the quality of the songs on the album, and both of them could have benefited by paring back some of the tracks, and which I also had discussed on last week's show. So I kind of danced around that a bit, Chris, but I hope that ultimately answers your question. And either way, thank you so much for the comment this week. All right, Siwa9878 on YouTube writes, thanks for the podcast episode. Your line, in the end, almost seems single-worthy, made me think. It literally is the first time that we have had more than one new DM track between albums. We had Shake the Disease and Only When I Lose Myself and Martyr for the singles compilations and the best of compilations. So 4 new tracks in between an album is a first in DM's history. So what if we indeed get a single release, and if it is only digital on streaming, of In the End with M's cinema release in September, October, November, or whenever the film comes out in cinemas? I'm sure a physical release of all 4 tracks will follow later, not before M's physical release. So, first off, let me push back on one thing. I would include Surrender in there with Only When I Lose Myself, as those were both recorded during the Ultra sessions and came out. Well, one of them ended up being a B-side, obviously, but they did come out post Ultra, and it served as a B-side on one of the compilations for the singles release, right? But you are indeed right. I mean, this is 4 new tracks, and I'm trying to go back and think. Dangerous, Sea of Sin, Happiest Girl, that was only 3, right? So I'll repeat just the commentary that I said before about those 4 unreleased tracks. I think they're all 4 of them are of really good quality. And whether or not they release all 4, that's what I've been told is supposed to happen, that all 4 are supposed to come out in promotion of the album. It makes me wonder a little bit if we'll get in the end with the release of the film, but perhaps those 3 other tracks will be reserved for whenever the band, if the band ever decides to release a vinyl single box set for the singles that were released on the album. But Memento Mori was unique, and the number of songs that they chose to have remixed was certainly well beyond your typical singles release cycle attached to the album. So I would really love to hear from you and your thoughts on what Siwa had to say here regarding singles in between, or B-sides in between albums, and what kind of format we'll end up getting those tracks in. And perhaps some of those more notable listeners to the show that may have some inside information that I can or cannot share, maybe they would like to reach out to me and let me know as well. I'll just leave it at that. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. All right. Stephanie from the Baltic Sea writes this. I don't have a song interrogator on DM, but I've always wondered what sound was collected on Pipeline. Is that a ping pong ball? I have no idea. And is that really an engine starting on Stripped? And does Make Amends and Alibis and Don't Say You Love Me refer to home and the lyric line, Pretend That I'll Make Amends? That's it for me. Thanks as always for the effort and the great thoughts on the podcast. Best wishes from the Baltic Sea, Stephanie. So, Martin likes to revisit concepts and ideas and song titles and song lyrics. There's no surprise about that. So, the Make Amends and Alibis and the Pretend That I'll Make Amends, that doesn't surprise me. Martin's got his own vernacular and certainly hasn't shied away from, again, repeating certain types of phrases or the way that things are worded. As I've said, one of the questions that I would love to ask either of them when it comes to Memento Mori, were some of those moments on the album intended to be nods to previous records? The scratch squeal at the beginning of People Are Good, that sounds just like it was lifted from I Feel You. The sometimes out of Caroline's Monkey, that sounds like it came from Clean as well. So I would very much be curious. I'm very curious to know whether or not they did those things intentionally. In terms of the sampling that was done, the best source for that would be to go back to those remastered documentaries, and especially the ones for Some Great Reward, Construction Time Again, and Black Celebration. They get into a lot of detail in terms of what they used for sound sampling. One of the coolest ones I always thought was when it's either Black Celebration or Flying on the Windscreen. I want to say it's Black Celebration, and I know that you listening will correct me if it's not. But where they set up the mics in the field and they had the fireworks that were going off over. Might have been Flying on the Windscreen. It's been a long morning. I did a show already today. And then the starting engine on Strip, yeah, I believe that was one of the label guys' Porsche, right? Or was it actually was it Jonathan Kessler's Porsche? I know it was somebody's Porsche that they ended up sampling for the starting up of the at the beginning of Stripped. Sorry, I'm beginning to fade. Can you tell? You kind of hit that point as a broadcaster when you do so much work, and when I enter into sort of a 4-hour mark, that's when I begin to sort of trip myself up, and I'm about there because I also recorded my Star Wars podcast just before I sat down to record this one. So, as always, Stephanie, thank you so much for the comment this week. All right, let's also hear from Ricardo Gomez, who writes this. I reached out a while back to share how Depeche Mode has been the soundtrack of my life. Their music has journeyed with me through nearly every season, good and bad. This year, my wife and I are celebrating 29 years of marriage. Congratulations. My wife and I just celebrated our 25th. When we first started dating, she quickly learned Depeche Mode was my favorite band, and I doubt she'd realize that by marrying me, she'd be welcoming them into the family too. Yeah, I lucked out because Melinda was already a fan of Depeche Mode when we met, so that was pretty awesome. Certainly not as hardcore as I am, but she did go to many shows during the Exciter tour with me. One of our early goodbyes was her seeing me off as I left for a short trip to Sacramento to catch the Exotic tour with a group of friends. Our first concert together was the Singles tour in '98, and she joined me at nearly every show I've attended since. We hit a rough patch in the mid-2000s, right around the time of Playing the Angel. That album always takes me back to that difficult time, and I'm grateful we made it through. I know the record stirs up some heavy memories for you, too. It's wild how Martin's lyrics felt like they were written just for me during that time. Yeah, and you know what? I know that I've made mention of it. Obviously, you brought it up, but Playing the Angel is the one that I've got to do something to break the nostalgia feels attached to that record. It is, and I haven't done a lot of research on it, and maybe I should, but there's got to be a way to do that. There are several albums in my life, for good and bad, that are associated with very specific times. Playing the Angel is one of them. I was living in Grand Rapids, Michigan, going through a difficult time with the radio station. Melinda was pregnant with Kyle, who is now going on 19 in December, and that album came out right in the middle of all that turmoil. And there's a very specific, unnerving, nostalgic feeling that I have when I listen to that record. The worst one for me is another band that I absolutely love, and that's Churches. And their album, Screen Violence, is absolutely fantastic. I love that record. But unfortunately, I fell in love to that record at the moment when I was dealing with a myriad of health issues that ended up leading into my third open heart surgery and going through one of the worst periods of my life in terms of anxiety, topping it off with the loss of my friend. I'm so thankful that Memento Mori came out after all of that, because that album could have been the album that was tainted, and Screen Violence is so tainted for me, I cannot listen to it. Because it immediately brings up those feelings of that period of time, and it absolutely bums me out. And I haven't looked into how to break from that. There's got to be a way to do it. I've just simply avoided listening to both of those albums, and including Playing the Angel. Now, I can listen to some of the singles off of it. It doesn't bother me. But listening to that album top to bottom, it's really difficult, and it sucks because it's a great album. All right, getting back to Ricardo's comments. Depeche Mode is almost always playing in our home or on the road. One of my favorite things is watching Amanda sing along, comment on a lyric, or point out a sound that stands out to her. Her favorite song is Condemnation, and seeing her light up when they played it live in Los Angeles in March of 2023 was priceless. As for In the End, I honestly think it would have fit perfectly with Memento Mori. Maybe right in between Never Let Me Go and Speak to Me. And hey, now I've got the perfect song to play during my slideshow at my funeral. We'll own nothing in the end. Thanks for what you do. Keep up the great work, Ricardo Gomez. I actually think that In the End, while Speak to Me, I think really caps the album off well, Memento Mori. Less about the lyrical content and more about the music itself, which makes sense. I think the band had kind of eyed that song to be the last song on the album, and James Ford and Marta Solongny, as has been documented, were the ones that created the music for that. Dave gave them permission. So they really do go, and it really does sort of cap off the album. That being said, In the End would have been the perfect finale for Memento Mori. It's an absolutely fantastic song, and I am so excited to eventually get a clean copy of that. I'm glad the copy that I have is as good as it is, but the production work on that album and Spirit is so fantastic in my opinion. The sound quality is just great. I don't have the greatest stereo in my car, but I can crank Memento Mori and it does not deliver any sort of distortion or loss of the quality of the music and the intricacies of the different layers that they used in those songs. The production work is just fantastic. I cannot say the same thing for an album like Songs of Faith and Devotion, which is just a bummer to me. I cannot crank that record because it just ends up becoming sort of a washed wall of sound, and it's really, really disappointing. I want to add one more thought on this, though. I have the algorithm on social media has been feeding me a lot of clips about Depeche Mode from other fans. And if you're not on social media, I want to share this with you. It is really amazing to see the number of young people who have found Depeche Mode and are now fans like you and I were back at that age. I'm talking individuals in their 20s, early 20s, who post videos dancing and singing along to, various tracks. There seems to be no specificity relating to a particular era. I've heard songs from the latter era albums. I've heard songs from the early part of their career in these particular clips. It speaks to how this music resonates with young people the way that it did for us those decades ago. It still does today. It reminds me a bit of getting into music and seeing people wearing Jimi Hendrix shirts or Beatles shirts or Rolling Stones. Yeah, they were still making music, but this was sort of older generation music and young people finding these bands that had been around or had already come and gone. I'm seeing the same thing happen now with Depeche Mode, and it's really, really amazing to see that there is a brand new, whole new generation out there finding this band, to the point where if the band toured again, because I think this is a relatively new phenomenon of young people finding Depeche Mode on social networking. If the band were to tour again, I'm going to venture a guess that a lot of these kids, because I don't think all of these individuals are finding it because of their parents. I think they're finding the band on their own. I would venture a guess that you would see a much younger audience, along with us old farts, right? Us older devotees. I don't think I've ever referred to myself as an old fart, but I just did. I think we would see a lot more young people showing up at the show. I could be wrong on that, but I just wanted to share it with you because it was really cool to see so many young individuals making these videos and sharing their own devotion to the band. Makes you wonder, too, like, what would they look? How do us older, longtime Depeche Mode fans look to individuals like that? So, hey, as always, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. I hope you'll also check out my science fiction series if you're into science fiction. It's a 7-book series available in audiobook, ebook, free on Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, and paperback. I toy around with the descriptions of the book to see what sells better. I decided to go back to the beginning, and I lifted the actual description off the back of book 1, and I'm using that currently to go and promote the book. I don't think I've shared it on the show before. I've made a couple of slight adjustments, but if you're interested in reading my book series, this is the original description for book 1 that I wrote when the book first came out. It's 2172 and flight culture has replaced car culture. 2 of Earth's largest corporations now supply the planet with the technology and fuel to make air and space flight available to everyone. Taft Guardia spends his weekends at an abandoned flying field, racing through the skies with his 3 best friends and the girl that he longs to be with, Keitha Morrow. After receiving a mysterious message from her deceased aerospace engineer father, Keitha and Taft make a shocking discovery. With Earth now suddenly facing a great disaster, a ruthless and power-hungry enemy emerges. Unwittingly, Taft, Keitha, and their friends are thrust into the middle of humanity's fight for survival and future among the stars. Listen, pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. It's a fun, fast-paced, and action-packed epic space opera adventure without an agenda. It's also got some Depeche Mode references, as the main character is a massive Depeche Mode fan, at a time when the music through the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. I'll be back again next week. Until then, I hope to hear from you, and I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. I'll talk to you then. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast.